On the common street of Amine Boulevard lives dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, and serotonin. Tyramine is an essential amino acid that is obtained from eating foods rich in tyramine, aged cheeses, deli meat, and wine. It is the precursor to dopamine and therefore norepi and epi. These foods interfere with the action of the monoamine oxidase inhibitors, a group of drugs used for their antidepressive effects. Interference can lead to hypertensive crisis and has implications when administering anesthesia. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter that is both a monoamine, like serotonin, and a catecholamine, like norepinephrine. In fact, it is the main catecholamine found within the mammal's brain. It is primarily found in the brain, particularly in the cortex, where dopamine plays an important role with attention, learning, and memory functions. In the hypothalamus, where it plays a hormonal role by suppressing the release of prolactin, as well as in the midbrain substantia nigra, where it plays a role in motor function, addiction, and sense of reward. This feeling of reward helps characterize dopamine as the pleasure neurotransmitter within the brain and plays a key role when dealing with motivation and incentive behavior found with addiction. It is important to note that dopamine depletion can cause anxiety, fear, and depressive-like behaviors. There are 5 different dopamine receptors found within the human body, which are then separated into 2 distinct classes. The first class is the D1-like receptors, which includes D1 and D5. When dopamine binds to these receptors, an excitatory neurotransmission occurs by stimulating adenylate cyclase, which is an enzyme that converts ATP to cyclic AMP, which is required for a multitude of cellular functions. The second class is the D2-like receptors, which includes D2, D3, and D4. These play a key role in regulating the activity of dopamine by controlling its synthesis, release, and uptake within the body. It is the cooperative balance between these 2 classes of dopamine receptors that is vital for the expression of most dopaminergic-related behaviors. Norepinephrine works on adrenergic receptors in the CNS, heart, lungs, and vascular smooth muscle. It is metabolized either by catechol O-methyltransferase, COMT, or monoamine oxidase, MAO. Norepinephrine is present in large amounts in the reticular activating system and hypothalamus. It is involved in natural sleep and analgesia. Norepinephrine can send both excitatory and inhibitory signals. The blocking of the reuptake of norepinephrine is the mechanism of action of some of the tricyclic antidepressants. Additionally, monoamine oxidase enzyme inhibitors work by increasing the amount of norepinephrine available for release from the CNS neurons. Epinephrine. Although no antipsychotics work directly on epinephrine, it is important to note that through methylation, norepinephrine is converted to epinephrine. Tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin and melatonin. It is an essential amino acid that is obtained from the digestion of proteins. This amino acid cannot be made within the body, so we obtain it from our diet, primarily meat and fowl. Serotonin is a monoamine neurotransmitter which is derived from the amino acid L-tryptophan. Tryptophan is absorbed from the gut and transported to the brain, where it ultimately is converted into serotonin. An increase in carbohydrate intake helps to increase the transport of tryptophan into brain tissue, which may help explain why everyone is so content after a Thanksgiving meal. With some minor exceptions, serotonin does not directly stimulate other neurons, but rather regulates the responses of neurons to other neurotransmitters. This means that serotonin receptors work on other kinds of neurons, such as dopaminergic, cholinergic, and others, and strongly influence how other neurotransmitters are conveyed within the body. Serotonin also helps to regulate both sleep and mood, particularly depression and pain perception. It is an important neurotransmitter for blood sugar regulation as well as formation of ATP from glucose. It helps to regulate stores of body fat through leptin signaling pathways, which are involved with the metabolism of lipids. Finally, serotonin exerts control over the vascular system by promoting vasoconstriction and, to a lesser degree, some vasodilation. There are 14 different serotonin receptors separated into 7 classes found within the central and peripheral nervous system, which promote inhibitory or excitatory neurotransmission. Receptors 5-HT6 and 5-HT7 are located within the limbic system of the brain and appear to play a role in mood and emotions. Reduced serotonin transmission can lead to depression, anxiety, and impulse control disorders. It is important to note that selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, which increase the amount of available serotonin within the brain, are one of the most widely prescribed medications today. In a desert all his own, acetylcholine lives and can be considered a nomad. Acetylcholine is the major neurotransmitter in the peripheral nervous system. It is produced in the brain from the byproduct of glucose metabolism of acetyl-CoA and choline. Acetyl-CoA and choline are conjugated within the cell body to form acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the major neurotransmitter controlling both voluntary and involuntary muscles. It acts on nicotinic and muscarinic receptors. Primarily, it produces excitatory response, but in some cases can produce an inhibitory response. In the brain, acetylcholine is important because they act as gain control mechanism enhancing the release of other neurotransmitters. The tricyclic antidepressants and MAOIs can cause anticholinergic side effects by increasing sympathetic stimulation from excess norepinephrine. Moving on down to the active street of excitatory lane lives glutamate and aspartate. Glutamate is primarily obtained from the diet, but can be synthesized in the body as a byproduct of the citric acid cycle. It is the major excitatory neurotransmitter that lives in the brain and has important roles in memory and learning. It works on NMDA, AMPA, and kainate receptors. Aspartate is its excitatory sister that lives in the spinal cord and is the primary neurotransmitter there. It can be synthesized in the body as a byproduct of the uric acid cycle and can be obtained from the diet. It works on the NMDA receptors, but not as strongly as glutamate. It is the excitatory teammate of glycine in the spinal cord. Next, we pass on down to a negative street called inhibitory valley. GABA, or GABA-aminobutyric acid, is the major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain and is synthesized from its excitatory counterpart glutamate through glutamate decarboxylase. It works on the GABA receptor to increase the passage of negative chloride ions, making the cell more negative and less likely to depolarize. Benzodiazepine works on the GABA receptors by enhancing GABA's affinity for GABA receptors, potentiating its effects. Glycine is the principal inhibitory transmitter in the spinal cord and acts on glycine receptors to cause hyperpolarization in the cells similar to GABA. Glycine is easily influenced by the peer pressure of glutamate. Glycine and glutamate work together to agonize NMDA receptors and is the only excitatory function of glycine. On a faraway island all alone are the peptides. Peptides are the most common neurotransmitters in the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus integrates all of the input of the autonomic nervous system and regulates other functions, including emotions and sleep. Peptides are far more potent than other neurotransmitters, and only a small amount produces a profound effect. Substance P is an excitatory neuropeptide that is associated with inflammatory process and pain. It acts on the neurokinin type 1 receptors, and it has a large role in sensory function and has been associated with the regulation of mood disorders, anxiety, and stress. Increases in serum, plasma, and/or tissue substance P have been associated with major depression and fibromyalgia. Neurokinin 1 receptor antagonists are a class of medications that have antidepressant, anxiolytic, and antiemetic properties and are primarily used on chemotherapy patients. Metenkephalin is also known as opioid growth factor. It is the endogenous ligand for the mu-opioid receptor and therefore exhibits similar effects to the opioids that we administer, effects of pain reduction and euphoria.